Giancarlo, a 25-year-old professed religious, studying theology in preparation for the priesthood. When I went to see him for the first exorcism, he was experiencing one of his crises. He was tossing on his bed, while five brothers were struggling to hold him down. Day and night, the members of his congregation took turns to watch over him and help him. When his crisis struck, he attempted to jump out the window, and 5 or 6 more men were called in to help restrain him. One of his hands was bandaged because he had broken 2 windows with his fist. The diocesan exorcist blessed Giancarlo weekly. I was summoned to express a second opinion and to provide supplemental exorcisms. The psychiatrist who was following his case and the diocesan exorcist appointed by the bishop reached the same conclusion. He was possessed. However, some of the symptoms did not convince the major superiors of his congregation. Since they had some doubts, they arranged for additional tests with a famous Roman psychiatrist, which were scheduled for a week after my visit. Giancarlo, a very intelligent religious of sound character, was highly esteemed by his superiors and companions alike. Throughout his postulancy, novitiate, temporary vows, and permanent profession, he had demonstrated all the qualities needed to become a good religious and a good priest. He was very faithful to his prayer life and was a good student with a pleasant disposition. But no one could have foreseen the trouble that appeared to strike him suddenly, even if, in retrospect, some incidents acquired a new significance. For instance, suddenly he found it impossible to pray, to remain in church, and, after one violent crisis, he attempted suicide for the first time. From then on, he was subject to violent crises several times a day, and even at night, each lasting 2 to 3 hours. Strong reinforcements were needed to hold him, while he screamed and alternated blasphemies with sarcastic laughter. He frantically thrust about, trying to injure himself. He was also subject to long spells of immobility, lasting up to 3 or 4 hours. During these periods, he had no control over himself, did not speak, and did not react to external stimuli, not even pinpricks. Nevertheless, he remained conscious and later recalled all that had happened. After a long exorcism, I was convinced that I was in the presence of total demonic possession. I admired the wonderful assistance that his order provided, beginning with his superior, who believed in the possibility of demonic possession. This is uncommon among the clergy. He had done everything possible to obtain healing. He even took upon himself the hardest tasks, such as the night vigil. I also admired his brothers, who, besides constantly praying for his healing, took turns to assist him. My visit confirmed that they had taken all the right steps, while they waited for the visit from the Roman psychiatrist for greater certainty. Unfortunately, the psychiatrist decided to bring along his wife, a psychologist, who, in my opinion, completely conditioned his diagnosis. This visit consisted of a short and peaceful meeting with the patient. The two left, after refusing to stay and witness one of the victim's violent crises, which happened shortly after their interview. Not surprisingly, they diagnosed that Giancarlo was hysterical and suggested that he could be cured by sending him away from his religious house for 1 month on vacation. During this time, he would have to suspend all religious practices, exorcisms, and assistance. The superiors were very perplexed with the prescription of the famous doctor, because they were aware that Giancarlo's violent attacks and suicide attempts required constant watchfulness. In the meantime, I could see that the exorcisms were beginning to obtain positive results. I advised the superiors to ask for a third opinion. They had already heard the opinion of 2 psychiatrists. It would do no harm to ask for a third. I also suggested that, as a minimum precaution, they choose one among the few psychiatrists who are aware of and have experience in demonic possessions. Thankfully, they followed my advice. The psychiatrist who was consulted performed a thorough examination and reported that the patient was in perfect psychophysical condition, confirming what he had observed personally, that is, Giancarlo manifested a horror of the sacred that is typical of diabolic possessions. Thus, Giancarlo continued to be under the treatment of intensive exorcisms and the other means we use in similar circumstances. The Lord lavished his graces on him. He began to improve gradually and rapidly, beyond the most optimistic expectations. I could see the progress every time I visited him for my monthly exorcism, while the diocesan exorcist continued his weekly sessions. I believe that this case was successfully resolved thanks to the prayers of the entire community and Giancarlo's full cooperation. He followed our instructions with an iron will and earnestly fought against the attacks of the evil one. His healing was almost complete within 3 years. The few consequences that remain are rapidly disappearing. Considering that the reason for his possession went back to his birth, he was rejected by his father, who did not want any children, particularly male children. The healing was truly rapid. We were later able to discover that the incidents that led to his possession had been accumulating throughout his entire life and culminated in his first violent attack, which exposed all the evil that had built up through the years. Even though no two cases are alike, during my long years as an exorcist, I have run across several situations where liberation required longer periods of time. Sometimes, the best I could do was make life easier for the victims.